The next session is called dotBrands, the story so far and what lies ahead. And leading us in this discussion will be Martin Sutton of the Brand Registry Group. Martin is the executive director there. He is one of the co-founders of the Brand Registry Group, which supports the interests of major brands that operate or intend to apply for their own dotBrand registries. This association tackles policy and contractual issues within the ICANN arena, where Martin has been actively engaged for many years, as well as providing a network for brand holders to share best practices for launching and operating their dotBrand registries. So with that, please join me in welcoming Martin to the stage.
Thank you, David, and thank you, MarkMonitor, for inviting me here to speak today. I am always thrilled to be here, and usual topic as well, I think, for the last X number of years. So those that may not have met me before, my previous life before a few years ago was at HSBC, where I was involved with security and fraud risk at group level, managing the internet threats as they were emerging. And it was just at a time when phishing was starting to get a grip, and we used to have one attack every 3 months. Then they quickly evolved into one a day, multiple a day, then malware. So I've been through a lot of issues that probably you have all faced in terms of managing your brand, protecting your consumers, from my experience with HSBC. So what I wanted to talk about today is really just to give you an overview of what is happening out there in the dotBrand landscape. It's not always obvious what's going on out there unless you're a customer of particular dotBrands, and whether they are actively using those dotBrands in a way that you can see it, either through advertising, through online services that they provide. So hopefully I'll give you an insight as to what is going on there, and looking at ways where it either complements or helps in terms of brand protection and domain management strategies. We'll also take a little look at what's next, what should we be looking out for. Then if I've got time, I know I'm always told I run over time, but hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end for any Q&A. So let's quickly about the Brand Registry Group. Yes, you heard there, it was formed some time ago. It was really at the point where applications were revealed at ICANN, where a large number of applications came in for dotBrands to run their own secure, controlled spaces on the internet. And with that, there was a number of bumps in the road, if you like, in terms of contracting requirements, policy issues that remained within ICANN that would not have been tackled up to that point. And certainly it helped where brands got together and could work collaboratively to see what changes could be implemented through ICANN, but also beyond that as to how they utilize those spaces by sharing experiences, learnings, and best practice. So we have a diverse membership, which straddles the globe. They also straddle different industries. So in all, we cover about, our members have in total around 70 dotBrand TLDs. Okay, and the main thing there in terms of ICANN, it is a strange place. It is not always something that brands cherish in terms of having to speak up and put their positions across in such an awkward environment where lots of different components of the community around the globe come in and try to challenge the status quo or policies that need to be changed that could affect you. Previously, the interest would have been on a brand protection perspective, but as dotBrands come along, they've got another different angle to come in and try to make sure they protect their interests. The BRG then provides them a voice at ICANN, and it makes it easier for their concerns to be raised through a trade association like the BRG rather than individually. Some still do, but many do not wish to spend time, effort, and resources on actually participating at ICANN, so they can actually use the BRG instead. Okay, so let's have a look at what has been happening, because this, as I say, may not be easily apparent to internet users. What we've seen, or in fact, last time I was here, let's go back, I think October 2016, I was here with a panel talking to Cecilia Smith from Fox, with Cole Quinn from Microsoft, and Karen Day from SAS, all of whom are members of the BRG and have their dotBrands. At that time, we were talking about what was starting to happen. At that stage, many had only just really been delegated onto the root of the internet. Some were still in pre-delegation testing, so hadn't even rolled out at that stage. And at that point, I think it was about 5,000 domains that we were quoting as seen and visible on dotBrand TLDs. So now you can see that's almost trebled in the last 2 years. So and that's probably much higher than that already, because that would have been a month ago. So what we've seen is a sort of steady growth over this period of time. But it is important to remember that these volumes, when you compare them to generic TLDs, are fairly insignificant. And there's a reason for that. The only reason you would actually put domains into your own registry as a dotBrand is for a purpose. They're going to be for a use. They don't have cyber squatting. Well, they shouldn't have. There's no domain investors. They're not selling any domains. So you haven't got all of that noise within that registry. And then even just in this last part of this year, we've seen a growth of 4,000 domains. So again, good, steady progress. Not going to rock the world, but it's good to see. Now, I think, within the industry itself, it tends to relish on measures of domain name volumes. That doesn't really fit well and bode well for dotBrands. As I say, they're only going to register domains when there's a purpose to do so and a use for them to apply that to their registry. And within the more generic open commercial environments, they like to measure the number of domains because that gives the impression that there's a strong demand for those domains. But as I say, a dotBrand is not actually selling domains, so this is not a particularly effective measure. More measures would be useful are things like Alexa ratings. So one domain could actually draw in millions and millions of internet users on a regular basis. So irrespective of how many domains are on a dotBrand TLD, they could actually be very active, and internet users can adopt them fairly easily, depending on how they're used. So what I wanted to explore here is, why would a dotBrand start to use, and how would they use their new space, their own secure, controlled space? Again, it's not rocket science. Social media, great, okay, we can do that already. Websites and redirects, yeah, do that already. Email, might be a bit of a challenge there, but yeah, we do that already. There might be some other interesting areas to explore that are not so visible. What we tend to find is that any measures that are in the public domain are typically websites and redirects, those sorts of things that are easily visible and recordable. So there might be other things in the background happening that you may not be aware of, that they might be trying out on an internal basis. So no real surprises there. So I just want to manage expectations. You're not going to hear anything fancy and new, but you may hear things that are incrementally beneficial to dotBrands as they start to activate and get to know what a dotBrand can do for them. So I think I'll start with the social media, which is, there's a number of examples. I think in the previous session on domains, somebody was referencing finding numerous cases of dotBrands utilizing URL shorteners within their dotBrands. So they'll create a short, specific term, branded term, that they can use in social media. And obviously, the sort of things that this helps from an organization perspective, or rather from a user, is that it creates that more instant trust by replacing what was very random strings, and sometimes quite contentious if you are having to purchase domain strings, if you like, or use domain strings that were from sanctioned countries. So by enabling a dotBrand, you've got the freedom and capabilities of using that more wisely in the social media space with URL shorteners. For the user, it provides some consistency and helps them remember these things. From the marketing perspective, it's helpful to reinforce the brand. And tangibly, it means that there's evidence of more click-throughs. So having things that consumers can see or feel trust in place, they're more likely to carry on through, click through, and do business with you. And I think throughout a number of these examples that I'll talk through beyond social media, there's a theme of control and flexibility. You know, you have choices, far more freedom of choices to do things in a way that you want to do and how you want to be portrayed online to users of the internet. And lastly, just on the social media aspects and the URL shorteners in particular, for a dotBrand that has not quite worked out what their strategy is long term, this is a very good introduction for them to utilize what was, you know, an expensive platform, but in a very low-risk manner, so they can test out internal controls and processes to be able to deliver something like this. And there is an incremental value then that they get from that dotBrand platform. So websites, again, not a great deal of new stuff here, but what does it mean for dotBrands that want to utilize that controlled space more effectively in their digital presence? I mean, let's rewind a bit. Before dotBrands could come along, we've got .com, we've got ccTLDs. Did you ever envisage that you'd have registries that you could use that were free from PPC sites, pay-per-click sites, or cyber squatting, or undesirable content, that in a space where you try to portray your business and put that in place, you were sharing rent with others that were not inclined to keep trusted and clean spaces? It was hard to think that that could come about after our experiences as brand protection experts to suddenly think, okay, actually a dotBrand, what does that deliver? A very clean space, a very clean space. So there is some advantages in there from starting to use that space to represent your brand more visibly, so the websites is a highly visible component. Certainly with highly regulated industries, the security aspect was very important. I was from a banking industry, I led the .hsbc application, and this came high up on the list of priorities for the business case, alongside protecting the brand. So as we were thinking about how to utilize a dotBrand, the advantages of being able to conduct that in a very secure environment and apply all the controls that we wanted to make that secure, it was abundantly clear that that was an area of importance for a dotBrand and what a dotBrand could deliver. And I think in terms of compliance, when you have things operating in a confined and controlled space, it's much easier to actually make sure everything is compliant with internal policies and perhaps external policies as well. You've got an easier, rather than the landscape perhaps of a structure across CCTLDs and GTLDs, and quite often small parts of the business going off and doing their own thing completely, what you have here is the ability to start to apply much better controls and apply minimum standards, and you're able to police those more effectively. Some good examples of this in the dotBrands space is the automotive industry. There's a couple of examples where they've allowed trademark licensees, their dealerships, authorized dealerships, to provide websites on their dotBrand. Now, a great thing there is you get to control all of the design features to some extent. You can police all of that, and any compliance-related matters as well. You can see everything all the time in one easy space. And so that's much better to police and enforce for compliance requirements, even extended out to trademark licensees. Seat and Audi, I think, are good examples of that from the European market. Just trying to think of others there that, I mean, from a banking industry, there's been a very strong usage of dotBrands from BNP Paribas. I think I flagged that previously on occasions at MarkMonitor events, where they've really pushed out into the marketplace and converted their online banking services into their dotBrand. Again, that commands a lot of users, and they adopt that dotBrand access point easily through good communication from BNP Paribas. But it's very quickly adopted by users because that's where they know they've got to go, and even more so, it's added security, it added confidence and trust for them to go to those new places. And that's significant numbers, so I can't remember what their online customer numbers were, but it's in the millions, and you can imagine that there's frequent visitors to those online services. So it reinforces users' minds as to how things are progressing. Yes, I recognize a brand at the end is good, and it's different to .com or .fr or .uk, but I can understand this. That adoption rate is probably interesting from the European marketplace, where we see a lot more use cases for dotBrands. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is there's not a great emotional attachment to .com. If you see some of the structures of large organizations, especially global organizations, they utilize perhaps .com for their corporate site, but really their business services and delivery of access points to consumers is actually at the CCTLD level, at a local level. So they're already used to going to different places of the internet, and there's been no real issues with converting users into that new dotBrand landscape. The other thing with the websites that is fairly obvious, but I think it needs to be stated, is the flexibility it provides. I can remember times where we'd be running around at last minute trying to complete domain registrations because the product owner has not bothered to get people involved with organizing domain searches and registrations ready for launch. It happens, it still happens. Within the dotBrand environment, you've got a better control. You've got a unique opportunity to use whatever you like virtually. It's instant, you can do it. There and then, there's no problems. You don't have to do any searches. You will need to think about what other stuff you want to register for a protective measure outside of that dotBrand, but in terms of pushing something out, you've got greater flexibility of what you use as a domain, which could be whether it's a product name or something intuitive that helps customers get to where they need to get to fast. So I think it's really helpful to point out there that the flexibility together with this choice, this ability to use meaningful terms at the internet entry point for customers, makes it far more intuitive for the user, so that user experience is enhanced as well. Now, the other thing is, in terms of taking a sort of different slant of view here, but I mean, I've got Alexa in my office, which I argue with day in, day out, trying to get information or to play something. So voice is becoming increasingly used in our space instead of typing things out. Even my car, I mean, for years I've been talking to my car. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but now it's talking back. So, you know, who's the crazy one there? It does talk back to me. It doesn't always get things quite right. So I think at the moment there's an issue between when I ask it to play some music, it gets confused with sort of navigational requirements. So I think some of the issues when I was expecting Stairway to Heaven to play, only to be told that destination cannot be found, was actually probably a relief, I suppose, at the end of the day. But voice is becoming very much, especially in the new generations, the access point. So with voice, when you look at the options that you can do with your .brand, in terms of putting intuitive domain names in front of your brand, that may actually facilitate a lot more positive experience for users as they get information drawn from the internet tied to those keywords, products, services tagged with your brand. Ultimately, again, similar to social media, there's a big, strong trust element here as customers get used to going into those new website spaces created on a .brand. Oh, I've gone back. Let's try that. Now, sometimes I get, it's interesting to hear people's opinions about redirects. .brands, they're not really using them. You know, they're just putting a load of redirects. What's the point of that? Well, actually, it's got some very valuable achievements behind this. So I'm giving an example here, which is DVAG, a German financial organization. They've probably got the largest number of domains registered to their .brand. Many of those are actually directed towards distinct elements within their current websites in .com or wherever else they've got their websites. And if you think over the many years of developing websites and content, these have got really deep. So you've got lots of content, lots of layers to get through. So for customers to get where they want to as quickly as possible, and in intuitive searches, for instance, you can use your .brand to help direct and navigate customers to the right area, even within those deep layered websites. It may also give them information back as they see the experiences of users to inform them intelligently as to how they might want to create those environments within the .brand environment at a later stage. So just because they've put in redirects doesn't mean that it's not still meaningful and purposeful. There is still lots of benefits that can be drawn from that, and it may be a lot of data that they're bringing in to work out their strategies for the future and rolling out certain requirements within their .brand environment. Email. I think this is a tricky one. There hasn't been a great deal of confidence yet of brands converting to a .brand for use of email. There is some good examples, mainly with perhaps B2B entities that have taken advantage entirely of their new .brand space because they never had the right term, the right string within the GTLD environment. Good example of that is .weir, an engineering company that transitioned really lock, stock, and barrel into their .weir space. And global .weir has a lot of content, rich content about all of their diverse products and services across the globe. And with that, they used email. Now, weir is a short string, so that probably didn't have experiences or incidents potentially of what we call universal acceptance issues. And this isn't really a problem with the dotBrand or any of the new GTLDs. It's more to do with everything that's been attached to the system and our software packages that don't recognize strings of perhaps more than 4 as a valid extension. Similarly with IDNs, the international domain names. Some of those have problems in browsers, or did have in some of the browsers originally. And to start with, when new GTLDs rolled out, there was a bit of a lag before some of the browsers actually keyed in the new strings that had been launched and delegated. So email is a careful consideration. Nevertheless, we are seeing that start to emerge where people have got their plans and implementation progressing. And one of them was recently announced from Canon. So @mail.canon is their choice to use that platform and provide a consistent message, consistent branding for their email. Now, when you link that together with some of the comments we heard this morning from Mark and the email type of issues, this starts to become quite a useful area to be able to transition to and start using mail from a dotBrand. And then I'll cover some of that in a minute. And then here I just want to sort of emphasize some of the fact that it's not all visible. So there will be some internal network advantages that dotBrands will be exploring. Not even I will know about these, so it's only from conversations with individual dotBrands that we may be able to understand perhaps some of the internal purposes that they've used for their dotBrand. But certainly going back to sort of compliance and security, they can set those minimum standards within that space. So that includes all the security standards as well. We heard somebody mentioned earlier today about the HTTP Strict Transport Security, HSTS. For a dotBrand, that's a very good way of being able to easily deploy across all of the extension domains that they apply to their dotBrand automatically. And that is being seriously considered by a number of dotBrands. Some who have already started to actively use their dotBrands have to think about retrospectively applying protocols to their existing domains. But given the extent of those volume of domains at this stage, it's not a worrisome thing. But they still have to think through what are the implications. So if they're using redirects, and those redirects are going to non-HTTPS locations, there might be some consequences there that they need to address and make some changes within their non-dotBrand domains. And certainly looking at the email examples there, being able to apply standards like DMARC, protocols like DMARC across all of your domains that ever use email within that environment. Again, much more easier to apply, control, and police. And let's not forget that this is giving brands the opportunity to control space right from the root of the internet. And, okay, given that they still need to recruit a back-end provider and a registrar, it's still limited in terms of risk. They can control those through contractual elements and compliance checks. So they are then really controlling end-to-end, which is something that they've never had before. I think that will start to stimulate some innovation as we go forward, because as the use cases emerge, as the visibility increases within the organizations, because it's still a challenge within organizations to make changes like this and agree to go a different course. But as that happens and they see more visible use cases emerge, then people will start to think about how they might even use this more effectively for other things within their organization that perhaps nobody has ever considered before. Innovation is quite an interesting one as well. If you hear people around ICANN, they kind of suggest that there's no real innovation out of new GTLDs. But even some of the incremental elements that I've talked about there, to the individual brand owner, that's innovation. It's something that they weren't able to do specifically like that before they had their .brand. So whilst it may be incremental and it may not be all singing and all dancing fanfare, it is starting to happen, and people will create their own innovation in time. So let's have a look at how this might impact brand protection and domain management within organizations. I mean, a .brand is not going to wipe out all of the issues that you see day in, day out in terms of protecting your brand online. It doesn't magically disappear. What it might do, though, is give you confidence to work out different strategies. And certainly, some of our members and others that I've spoken to have already started to implement a rationalization of a domain portfolio where they can feel very much more comfortable and confident in reducing and getting rid of domains that serve no purpose or very little purpose within their domain portfolio, because they feel confident that over time the .brand will start to take a larger piece of their business out to market. They've also got to balance the books at some stage, so they can't keep investing in both. So they build in these strategies to work out how they are going to shift some of their financial costs and resources. But nevertheless, that gives them a sort of stimulus to think about, okay, can I rely now more on monitoring enforcement rather than lots and lots of domain registrations for protective purposes? And given the fact that new GTLDs have only really just started, we can expect a lot more to emerge in future years. And a strategy of just mass registrations will just no longer apply in future. I think one of the ways to look at this is perhaps not so much brand protection and domain management, but just kind of brand reinforcement. It strengthens up your armor as you try to build up trusted spaces on the internet that you can control better. You won't typically see people disregard their CCTLDs and GTLD and spaces. They will all be complementary. So I don't think there'll be any huge rationalization where they just rely entirely on their .brand. We mentioned GDPR. I know it's a swear word around here, but actually for a .brand, they want to be seen. They want people to be able to validate. They want people to feel really comfortable that they are dealing with that brand. So irrespective of GDPR, because there's no personal information on who is within a .brand or shouldn't be, then they could take the decision to continually publish and make accessible information about each of those domains, or even simplify it still. So within anything that ends with that string, that brand, this is where you go to. If there's any problems, there's one point of contact. Oh, not quite wrap up. Don't get too excited. So what next? I mentioned earlier this sort of internal awareness is growing. So in large organizations, people don't hear about their .brand. It's only pockets of the environment, of their internal environment, that discuss it and work out whether they shouldn't use it in certain ways. But as visibility grows, either through seeing stuff on social media, adverts in airports, people start to wake up to this idea internally and say, what if? How can I? And all of those questions start to prompt different ways and uses of that TLD. And that's quite interesting to hear. The likes of HSBC, my colleague Kevin, when he launched the URL shortener, not many people had been knocking on his door saying, I want to use that .brand. But as soon as it was out there and visible, so many different parts of the group entities were knocking on his door, queuing, saying, I want some of that. So it's interesting how once you start pushing something out, it creates its own momentum. So what else will we see? We've got ICANN working on this process. It's been lengthy already, so it's 2012, the last round opened up. We're 6 years on and no real date in the pipeline. There is, of course, a lot of work going on. there's lots of different interested parties around this space, some pushing to go forward, others pushing it back. So, it is important from an ICANN point of view to have the views of the community respected and worked on to create a helpful improvement to the next round. But with that, obviously, it creates lots of delays, especially in that community. It's not an enabler normally. Nevertheless, subsequent procedures, which is the policy activities going on there to try and apply improvements to policy and process around applications, has recently issued its initial report. And that means that we're starting to see some progress, but it's still not a very quick process. So these are just a number of stages that we have to go through within the ICANN arena before the board would say, yes, go ahead. Now, what we've stated from the Brand Registry Group, we wrote to the board earlier this year and said, look, you'd really need to get your act together here because it's been X number of years since we were expecting the next round. You'd promised it within 1 to 2 years after the last round. Nothing's happened. All those companies and organizations that were looking to see how it went first time, let the pioneers take the rough edges. We'll come along when it's smoothed out, thank you very much, but as long as it's in a couple of years, they've been waiting an awful long time. That can be also looked upon as anti-competitive. So we did highlight this to the board, and we've said that there is demand. We know of brands in particular that want to take advantage of the next application window. There are many others out there that we know of. So we've sent that information in, and it's backed up recently with our comments to the initial report. But unless ICANN hears this, and it's reinforced by many others saying, no, that's a good idea, no movement will be made. But suggestions have been put forward as to perhaps running separate, smaller, distinct rounds whilst the policy development work continues, so it's done in parallel, just to make sure that ICANN can keep some momentum going on in new applications. But all the time that this is happening, it's giving brands the opportunity to see what's happening, look at how people have started to use their dotBrands, and build up their business case accordingly. So, this is it. This is the wrap-up here. It's nothing too exciting, I'm afraid. But that's it. I'm not here to sell the idea of anybody getting a dotBrand. What we're trying to do here is just raise awareness that stuff is going on there. You might not be aware of it, so there's some good resources out there that do track some of this. Dip in there, go and have a look. There is a lot of stuff going on, but you may not actually be aware of it. So hopefully it will spur on more activities within the existing dotBrands as they see others start to harness the power of their dotBrand. But as I say, most that have not got their dotBrand that want it are getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress at ICANN. So there needs to be some work done there. Now, I don't know if we've got time, but if there's a couple of questions out there, I'll be happy to take it. Otherwise, we could do shadows, animal shadows, I think. But no? No questions? Oh, I get off scot-free then. Thank you. Thanks very much.